Tropical islands are seductive. Days spent napping in hammocks under swaying palm trees. Turquoise water so clear it hurts your eyes. The rhythm of the surf in your ears. I chose this Caribbean island because I wanted to swim in the ocean every day, practice scuba diving before the Galapagos, and have a change of scenery from the mountains where I spent the last 3 weeks. I didn't think the hot climate would be so difficult to bear. I've lived in tropical regions along the equator for years. For some reason now, the humidity felt heavier. Combined with the heat, it was demoralizing. I wanted to get away from the busy downtown area and live somewhere peaceful with less noise and cleaner beaches. This meant sacrificing the convenience of supermarkets, restaurants, and cafes because the quiet, more pristine part of the island was considerably less developed. I booked a room in a shared house with 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a shared kitchen, and an upstairs and downstairs living room. Around the property were 4 private cabins, a swimming pool, and hammocks around a fire pit. Angelo, the handsome owner, lived in a separate cabin at the back of the garden. A tall metal gate, secured with a heavy padlock and chain, separated the property from the main road, where motorbikes and the occasional car passed by. At first, I booked the room for 2 days and paid with my credit card online. Then I asked the host if I could stay an additional 3 weeks and pay in cash to avoid the hefty online fee, which he accepted since it was all the same to him. A helpful hint for anyone traveling long-term to save some money on accommodations. The most striking feature of the beach was its expansive horizon. You could see exactly where it was raining on the ocean. I hadn't exposed my body to so much sunshine in 3 years and got a sunburn on my very first day. My daily routine involved taking a morning swim between 8 and 10 a.m., spending the hottest hours of the day inside the house doing my work, then taking an afternoon swim between 3:30 and 5:30 p.m. There was a convenience store on the corner between my house and the beach. It was small, with limited selection, but it had fresh produce and other staples, so it was enough. I bought canned tuna and tossed it in a salad of red onion, tomato, and cucumbers, with plenty of lime and cayenne pepper. I wrapped each mouthful inside a lettuce leaf for a cold and refreshing meal. I made rice and lentils with tomatoes, red bell peppers, onions, and plenty of spices when I wanted something more hearty. Sometimes the convenience store had green beans, which I stir-fried with garlic and ate them with rice and boiled eggs. These light meals were perfect for the hot climate. Years ago, I read Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. The story follows Florentino and Fermina, who fall deeply in love when they are young, but societal pressures force them apart. It explores the resilience of love and the challenges of pursuing it over a lifetime. The novel takes place on the Caribbean coast of Colombia in the late 19th century. The tropical setting added dimension to their suffering, since the characters had to wear corsets, hoop skirts, and waistcoats in the oppressive heat through their heartache. My attempts to establish a pantry in the kitchen cupboard proved futile. My rice and oats ended up as offerings to an ant colony. Using a styrofoam box did nothing to stop a determined mouse. I wondered if I should worry about snakes. The openness of the house let in the tropical breeze, but the lack of window screens and nets offered unrestricted access to the island's tiny trespassers. I've stopped counting my mosquito bites. I had a technique for keeping them from biting me in my sleep. I turn on the air conditioner, wrap the bedsheet around me, tucking it over my head and anchoring it down with my feet so the fabric would stretch over my body like a shield. It didn't always work. Mosquitoes still found a way to get their evening meal. I asked my host if he could get a mosquito net for me. He replied, there were no mosquito nets on the island. No one used them. Once on my daily walk to the beach, a small fly flew into my eye. It was painful for me, but death for the fly. With all the lushness this tropical island offered, why did this tiny life choose my eye to land upon, only to unknowingly cut short its own lifespan? I continued walking towards the beach, one eye stinging and watering, trying to remove the fragile little corpse. There was a baseball game by the beach every Sunday afternoon. A large crowd of locals would gather around the corner shop next to the baseball diamond. It was just an empty patch of grass, which is more than enough for people to have a good time. A lady sold me a fish empanada for 7,000 pesos. As soon as I paid her, she sold another one to a local for 5,000 pesos. I walked back to my house, contemplating if I would do the same if I was in her place. The empanada tasted average. I wondered if she minced the fish herself or bought it pre-minced in cans. Sometimes there would be a power outage or a water cut lasting a few hours. After this happened a few times, it felt completely normal. One needed patience and a certain air of carefree resignation to live on a developing island. There were 3 couples living on the property during my first week: Brazilian, Ecuadorian, Colombian, and they were all fighting. I believe the Colombian couple actually broke up. One changed his flight to return to Bogota early, and the other stayed to enjoy the island alone. The Ecuadorian couple went downtown one evening and got into an argument. The girl called the host, crying hysterically, begging him to pick her up. Angelo drove downtown and took her home on his motorbike. The boyfriend drove back separately. I guess this was enough time for each to cool down because the young couple still slept in the same bed that night. It's moments like these when I'm relieved to be single. At first, I thought the Brazilian couple were mother and son. The woman looked much older, with thin, graying hair and heavy bags under her eyes. The man had a cheerful disposition and a more youthful face with a bushy mustache that curled up at the ends. The couple fought loudly in Portuguese nearly every day. Sometimes they ate dinner separately. They'd been traveling through Colombia for a month. The language barrier and unfamiliar surroundings must be a breeding ground for stress and tension. The only other resident who was single was a doctor from Bogota named Benjamin. I was taken aback by his age. 28 seemed incredibly young. A friend told me outside the United States, doctors began their medical careers much earlier. He beamed with pride as he recalled the first time he delivered a baby all by himself. Benjamin told me he had a cocaine addiction for the past year and a half. Long night shifts at the hospital, combined with the ease of availability of drugs in Bogota, prompted his habit. I've never purchased drugs before, and I certainly didn't come to Colombia to try them, but Benjamin gave me the price comparison, which may have changed in the past year from inflation. Apparently, it's $80 a gram in Miami and less than $10 a gram in Bogota or Medellin, and you can get it delivered to your door in 20 minutes or less. That's faster than most food deliveries. Benjamin quit his job and moved to the island over a month ago, where he's been clean the entire time. It's possible to get cocaine here, but it isn't as easy. He's ready to go back to work, but has turned down job offers from major cities because he's afraid of being in close proximity to drugs again. Luckily, he got an offer at a clinic in a small town outside of Bogota, where the working hours were from 1 p.m. to 8 p.m. He was confident, with the countryside setting and the healthier shifts, he'd break his addiction for good. 2 days later, Benjamin asked to borrow money. Only 10,000 pesos, which is about $2.50. He hadn't paid his rent either. He said he lost his debit card, which I found alarming since I guard all of my credit and debit cards with my life. A day later, he said the card was actually hidden inside his wallet and he only thought he lost it. By the time he found it, he'd already told his bank it was lost and the card was locked. A plausible story, I suppose. One afternoon, we went paddleboarding at sunset. The water was so clear we could see the corals in the moonlight. He told me about a time when he was assisting a senior doctor back in Bogota. A pregnant woman came in for a checkup, saying something was wrong. The doctor listened to her belly with a stethoscope, used another tool to reach up inside, and pulled out her dead fetus, which was the size of a large grape. He showed it to her and said, "Sorry, your baby's dead." Then he dropped the fetus into the trash can. The unfortunate woman started screaming and crying while the doctor remained stone-faced in her tragedy. Benjamin stood there with his mouth hanging open in disbelief at the appalling bedside manner and tried in vain to calm the hysterical patient. One weekend, we were invited to a birthday gathering in the middle of the island. There was a lake where small alligators surfaced. Cows wandered around the perimeter. Benjamin said this was a Rastafari community, but I knew this wasn't the case from the moment I saw pork cooking. My first solo international trip was to Jamaica when I was 23 years old, and became familiar with certain aspects of the Rasta code of living, and pork was off the menu. These people were Caribbean Catholics, having a barbecue with coconut rice, boiled plantains, yuca, potatoes, and fried breadfruit. They purchased an entire pig for the occasion, and there was plenty of marijuana to go around. I don't smoke. Marijuana never had an effect on me. But Benjamin, on the other hand, smoked at least 5 joints throughout the course of the day. He confessed the 10,000 pesos he borrowed the other day was to buy just that, and he promised to pay me back as soon as his debit card unlocked on Monday. His tone and demeanor were so sweet and respectful, but I confess my opinion of him dropped. He resembled a tall child who could speak with a doctor's confidence, but a child nevertheless. I felt restless throughout the day. The heat, humidity, insects, and undeveloped area bothered me. Benjamin described it as an organic way of living. They raised chickens, went fishing, and grew their own vegetables, but I couldn't get the word poor out of my mind. Their cabins were made of wooden slats. The kitchen was basically a metal grill over a bed of coals. They were burning trash a few meters away from all the cooking. Benjamin was lying on a hammock, unbothered by the heat and the mosquitoes. He said this was all anyone needed. A good place with good people. I suppose he's right. I just haven't been able to connect with locals since I arrived on the island. My daily walks to the beach were usually met with catcalls by local men, driving by on their motorbikes or sitting on the side of the road. The local women don't smile or say anything to me when I pass by. Some even avert their eyes. They probably have a hard enough time trying to make ends meet, and wouldn't feel like smiling at a foreigner who has the time to go to the beach twice a day. I wanted to go back to the house and wash off the sweat and bug spray, but I decided to make the most of the evening. I observed the men did all the cooking, and there were very few women around. The family patriarch said the women were looking after the children in their homes all over the island. They'd come when the food was ready. The sheer size of the family was astonishing once everyone arrived, and apparently some didn't even show up. The women did the serving, putting a scoop of coconut rice, a piece of boiled potato or yuca, and a helping of pork on each plate. It didn't seem like there would be enough food for everyone. I started speaking to one of the men who was still cooking. He had a young daughter, wasn't married, and the mother lived with the child in a separate house. He asked me if I had kids. I said no, and I didn't want any. He asked, "But what if you have an accident?" I replied, "There are ways to prevent accidents." I was confused. IUDs and abortions were legal in Colombia. Birth control pills were cheap and over-the-counter. You could get Plan B delivered to your door. Maybe it was different on the mainland than it was on this tiny island. I spoke to the family patriarch who asked me where I was from. I replied, China. Sometimes I say the United States, but I find people are more curious about my ethnic origins, not my passport. The patriarch said there was a bit of Chinese ancestry in the family tree. He looked to be in his 50s, but revealed he was actually 70. When I asked him how many children he had, he said 5 with his wife, then lowered his voice to say, "And 1 on the outside." I wondered if lowering his voice meant his wife didn't know. It seemed like an awfully small island to keep a secret like that. I asked what a typical day was like, and he said pretty much the same as today. Go fishing, cook, serve any customers that come to the family restaurant, smoke, relax, listen to music, sleep. On the surface, they seem to live a drastically different life than mine, but I admit it's the same cycle of core activities. All non-residents of the island must pay a tariff at the airport of departure, but the money was kept on the mainland. There isn't much agriculture here, so most things needed to be shipped in, making them more expensive, especially with the price of fuel. The main industry is tourism, the fate of many tropical islands. I went scuba diving 3 times in the following week. I was nervous at first, since I hadn't gone diving in several years, but the water was so calm it was like a swimming pool. We didn't see anything more than a few stingrays and a turtle. My dive master, Ernest, was a local and seemed distracted. There was something wrong with his arm. The owner of the dive shop told me later that Ernest's wife just gave birth and the baby was jaundiced. Ernest also fractured his arm in a motorbike accident a few weeks ago, and the insurance wouldn't cover the costs. He had to go to the mainland to get an operation to fix his arm, which would cost money. His wife was giving him a hard time at home about their financial problems and the stress of being a new mother. Even in a place of beauty and relaxation like a tropical island, life's pressures are complex and can weigh heavily. I can only imagine the strain they're under, and hoped Ernest and his family are doing better now. I returned to the house. Benjamin was at his laptop, finishing the details of his new job. He was leaving soon, and was excited to start a new chapter in life. Another couple was arriving that day. I wondered if they'd fight, and if so, about what. I showered, ate a banana, and went to my room to do some writing. You never know the unseen narrative behind the friendly face. Get a glimpse of my daily life in Medellin in this video, where I shop at the local market, enroll in a dance school, and meet some intriguing new people at a house party.